Chapter 1. The first glimpse. Ethan Marlowe was the man who made the skyline look like a collection of glass teeth. By 3 p.m. the city smelled of ambition and the distant hum of traffic, and the glass towers of the financial district glinted like polished steel. In the 5th floor of the Marlowe Group headquarters, his office overlooked the Hudson like a king surveying his realm. A 10-foot window framed a view that made every other man in the city look smaller. He was sipping a double espresso, the steam curling in the morning light, when the security guard called his name. "Mr. Marlowe, we've got a delivery for you." Ethan nodded. "Let me get it," he said, and turned toward the stairwell. He was always in control of where his life would go. He could move the boardroom, the office, the world itself. He could even bend time a few minutes. The delivery was a sleek black file folder embossed with the Marlowe Group logo. He didn't open it until the office doors opened, revealing a young man in a crisp suit, eyes bright and unguarded. "Mr. Marlowe," the young man said, stepping forward. "I'm Julian Reyes. I was told you'd like to meet." Ethan smiled politely. "Come in, Julian." The meeting was short. They reviewed quarterly earnings, talked about expansion into Asia, and discussed potential acquisition targets. But as Julian stood to leave, he paused at the doorway. "Mr. Marlowe, I'm in your office on my way out," Julian said, and his voice was soft, a little too tender for the usual business tone. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "I think you're in the wrong office. Take the 11th floor and be sure to go straight up to the penthouse for the client presentation." Julian nodded, but before he could leave, he turned back. "I know you have a wife," Julian whispered, "and I'm sure she's well. I didn't mean to, you shouldn't be here." Ethan's voice was calm, but his eyes were hot. "Julian, we are not talking business right now." Julian left without a word. The elevator dinged and Ethan pressed the button for the 11th floor. At the penthouse, a glass wall opened to a balcony overlooking the city, and Ethan stood staring at the horizon. He could feel his heart pounding. The room hummed with a quiet electricity, as if the whole world was holding its breath. This was not the sort of thrill he had been expecting. He was thinking about numbers. He was thinking about quarterly reports, not about the faint, almost imperceptible stir that ran along his spine. He could not imagine that a simple conversation would turn the foundations of his marriage into a minefield. Chapter 2. Confrontation and Secrets. Later that evening, the Marlowe Group's executive suite glittered under soft white lights. Ethan and Sarah sat across from each other at a mahogany table. The room smelled of expensive leather and fresh coffee. It was a setting that should have comforted them both. Instead, it seemed to have a built-in echo chamber for their impending confrontation. "You have something to tell me," Ethan said. He turned to Sarah, eyes unwavering. You've been lying to me." Sarah swallowed, her hands trembled. She had always thought of herself as Ethan's best friend. She had never imagined that the very person she trusted most could feel like an intruder. "I have been in contact with I have not. The contact is a person, Sarah. A man. You've let him into your life and, worse, you've let him into my business. I'm not asking you to confess. I'm asking you to tell me everything." He pressed his fist into the table. Her voice was shaking. "It's not what you think. It's not a love affair. It's just something I needed." She closed her eyes for a second. "Julian Reyes. Hayes, a junior analyst at Marlowe Group. It's just a mistake." Her eyes glistened. "I know how it looks, Ethan. I know how it hurts. But I was bored. I wanted something new." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You thought you could play God and have a piece of him. You didn't think of me." He tapped his pen against the table. "We've built this company from the ground up. I'm the one who paid the mortgage. I've paid the taxes. I'm the one who's made all the sacrifices to keep you safe. Now you think you can just slip out of my life and be replaced with him." Sarah tried to swallow her tears. "I never meant to hurt you, Ethan. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. but I wanted to feel alive again. I don't know if I can say I'm sorry. It's not that I didn't love you." The silence stretched for a long time. The hum of the air conditioner and the faint sound of the city outside were the only sounds that cut through their silence. The tension was so thick you could feel it. Ethan could feel the blood draining from his face and the world around him beginning to blur into a storm of questions. "I was never going to let you go," Ethan whispered. The words were a mixture of pain and determination. Sarah looked up. "You think you're a god? I'm not the one who built the walls we now have. I'm the one who's built you. I'm the one who's building this." Her voice was almost a whisper. "I don't think I'm a mistake. I just don't know how to handle this. I can't explain my feelings." She looked down at her wedding band, a small, shining reminder of their vows. "If you want to know, you should ask. I won't be a mistake. I'll always love you. But I don't know if I've had a right." The conversation that took place in that room was, if anything, a microcosm of the storm that had already taken root. It was a question. It was the very heart of the relationship that had survived years of work, trust, and mutual sacrifice. Chapter 3: The delivery. The following morning, Ethan had an idea to keep the rest of the day focused. He called his legal counsel, and the lawyer, James, set up a meeting in the conference room. The office was a clean, well-organized space. The meeting would begin. "What's happening?" James asked, his tone professional. "You've received a call from Sarah, and you're about to get the delivery. So I'll need to see that you're still the only one that controls the company." Ethan nodded, then pulled the black folder from the office. The file was simple. It was a folder with quarterly results, but it also had a note attached at the bottom, written in a shaky hand. "Julian Reyes has a conflict of interest." James was careful. Conflict of interest. How so? Ethan stared at the note. He knew that if he did nothing, Sarah could become a risk in his world. He also knew he could do everything for her, but he had not thought about the effect it could have on his legal footing. He took a deep breath. "The problem is that you had a secret project for the Chinese market. You made a mistake by letting Julian get in. I'm concerned about the conflict, because I need to put you in the best position. You have to be the one who makes the decisions." The lawyer looked at him sharply. "You have to keep the company from being exposed. You have to do everything to keep the company in shape. This is a very serious situation. What can you do?" Ethan thought about it for a few moments. He could do many things. He could file a lawsuit. He could do an internal audit. He could do a thorough internal audit. He could do a thorough audit of all his employees. The question was how he could control the situation. He could not just wait for the next meeting or just do the next thing. He turned to James. "We're going to do a thorough audit of all employees, from the junior analyst to the C-suite. We'll find out the source of this conflict. We'll do everything to bring the conflict out to the surface. I want to protect the company, and I want to protect you." James was relieved that Ethan had a plan. He said, "Well, get the audit underway." He could see that his plan was the right one. He had a plan. He had a clear and decisive plan. Ethan thought it was an opportunity to take the situation in his own hands. It was an opportunity to turn the problem into an advantage. It was also a chance for Sarah to get back on track. The idea of that was in his mind. Chapter for the analyst. The next week, Ethan met with his head of ARA, Angela, to talk about the audit. She was a sharp woman who had climbed the ranks to where she was, and she was very proud of her accomplishments. "We'll get to the bottom of this," Angela said. "I have no doubt." Ethan nodded. "What does the audit look like? How long do we have to do this?" Angela replied, "Well, focus on the people who have direct contact with Marlowe Group's senior leadership. We'll start with junior analysts and see if we can identify any conflict of interest. That should give us enough data for an audit." Ethan was satisfied. Good. The following day, Ethan called Angela over to his office. He had a serious face. He wanted to be sure he was protecting the company and his relationship. He had a vision of the future and of the past. He was making a decision that would affect him and his company for the rest of his life. "I have an idea," Ethan said. "We're going to conduct a company-wide audit. We'll get the employees who have direct contact with our senior leadership. I want to do a full audit to identify any conflict of interest. That's the only way to keep the company safe." Angela was stunned. "You know that's a huge undertaking, Ethan. We'll have to talk to all the people. That will cost money, and that will take time. Are you sure?" Ethan nodded. "I'm sure. I want to do it." He wanted to protect his company, and the only way he could do that was to be in control. He could be a man in a glass office, but his mind was a storm of emotions that no amount of money or data could calm. The next week, he had an internal audit underway. He was the mastermind of this operation, but the people who would be involved were the only ones who could make a difference. They were not only the employees, but also the senior leadership that would determine the next moves. At the audit meeting, Ethan had a clear plan. He was ready to use the information that the audit was giving him. He was ready to use the people in a new way. That is, that he had no idea what he would do with them. Chapter 5. The C-Suite. The Marlowe Group's executive meeting took place in the boardroom on the top floor of the headquarters. The room was a marble and glass space that seemed to echo the city's ambition. The executive board sat at a table that looked like a small stage where the players in the world of finance had a chance to show their face. The air was thick with power. The city was far behind them. The boardroom was filled with Ethan, Angela, James, Sarah, and the board members. Ethan looked like a man who had the city in his hand. And yet, the tension he was feeling was more profound than any numbers on a board. It was a kind of tension that cut through the entire room. The board members were listening. They knew that the company was a stronghold of finance, and they had faith in the CEO. But now, they were about to hear something that could shake that confidence. The room was filled with anticipation. Ethan began speaking. He said, "I want to inform you all about the upcoming audit. It's going to be a big undertaking, but it's necessary. We found a potential conflict of interest within the company, and we are going to handle it with seriousness." There was a murmur in the room. Ethan had the company on a knife's edge, and it was now about to be shaken. "The audit will focus on the junior analysts who have direct contact with senior leadership," he said. "We're going to check for any conflict of interest. We're going to check for any personal relationships that could compromise the company. We're going to do it. That's all." The board members nodded. The meeting was going to be a series of serious discussions. In that space, the boardroom was a place of control. But the way it had changed in the space between a couple of hours had already begun to shift the mood in that space. After the meeting, Ethan walked out of the boardroom with a sense of clarity that would soon turn into dread. He had to make sure that Sarah had no more involvement with Julian. He had to protect the company, and he had to protect himself. Chapter 6. Infiltration. Ethan's first move was to start a direct investigation. He pulled a photo from the office's database, a photo of Sarah and Julian together at a hotel. He was a man of numbers, but he was also a man of secrets. He would do anything. He was a man who would use data and information to keep his company safe. The next day, he called James. James was his legal counsel. They met in the boardroom. The atmosphere was serious. The city's hum was behind the glass walls, but the interior seemed as if time had slowed. "James, I need you to draft an NDA. This is going to be a big thing. We're going to have to find out exactly what Julian and Sarah are doing. I have to protect the company. I have to protect myself. We're going to have a thorough audit. I want the NDA to keep us both safe." James sighed. He knew that the legal side of a company was a maze of hidden risks, and that the company's future could hinge on a few minutes. He knew that a strong legal framework could protect Ethan. He knew that a strong legal framework would also protect the company's future. "You'll get it drafted, Ethan. We're going to see how far we can go. We'll keep everything in the black box." Ethan nodded. The next day, he pulled out the black file folder again. He had an internal memo, and he had a plan to bring the audit to the next level. He was ready. Chapter 7. The setup. The next week, the Marlowe Group's internal audit team was busy. Ethan called Angela. He had a sense of the audit team and the next step in his mind. He knew that Angela was a sharp woman who would keep the audit team's focus. "What do we need to do, Angela?" Ethan asked. "We're going to bring a new team to handle this. We're going to find out how much data is there. I want to know how many employees have contact with the senior leadership." Angela nodded. She was a woman who had a lot of trust in her. She was a man who would do all she can to keep the company safe. She was a man who could do anything. She had to find out what Ethan had to say. They set up a cross-checking of all the employees. Ethan was watching the audit. The company's future was going to depend on that. One day, Angela called Ethan. She said, "Ethan, we found a huge data point. We have data that indicates that Sarah has been in contact with Julian, and that we're going to do a thorough audit. The data is big." Ethan was ready to handle it. He was a man who had a plan to bring the audit to the next level. He was a man who had data in his hands. He was ready. In that space, Ethan had to find a way to keep the company safe. He was a man who had a plan that could bring the audit to the next level. He was ready. He was ready to do it. After the audit, James was ready to have a legal perspective. James had to protect the company. James had to do a thorough audit. James was ready. He had a legal framework to keep everything safe. In that space, the audit was in a next stage. The audit had to be thorough. Ethan had the data. He had the data that would protect the company. Chapter 8. The outcome. After a thorough audit, the next week, Ethan had a final plan. He called Angela. He had a plan to find out exactly what Sarah and Julian were doing. He was ready to find the next stage. The company's future hinged on a few minutes. In the final audit, Ethan found that Sarah and Julian had a conflict of interest. The data was clear. The company's future could hinge on a few minutes. The data had a direct impact on the company. That was the real data that would show how the company's future would be. Ethan was ready to take action. He was ready to do a thorough audit. He was ready to do a thorough audit. Ethan's data was ready. He was ready. He had the data, and he was ready to protect the company. The company's future would be based on a few minutes. Chapter 9. The future. The next week, James drafted an NDA. Ethan was ready to protect the company. The company was ready. The company was ready to do the next step. The next step was the next step. Ethan was ready. Ethan was ready to keep the company safe. He had a data set that would help him. He was ready. He pulled out the black file folder. The data was ready. Ethan had a plan. The company was ready. The next step was to bring the audit to the next level. He was ready. He had a plan. The audit was the best approach to protect his company and himself. The audit was going to be the best approach to keep his company safe. He was ready to do that. The company was ready. The company's data was ready. The company's future would be safe. Ethan's plan would keep the company safe. He had to find the next stage. The data was ready. He was ready. Ethan was ready. He was ready to protect the company. He was ready to do a thorough audit. He was ready. The next step was to bring the audit to the next stage. He was ready. He had the data. He had the data. He was ready. The next step was a big audit. The audit would keep the company safe. He would do a thorough audit. He was ready. The company's future was a risk. The company's future was going to be safe. The company's future would be safe. The company's future would be safe. Ethan had to keep the company safe. He had to do the audit. He had to do a thorough audit. He was ready. The next step would be a next stage. He was ready. The next step would be a big audit. The next step was to keep the company safe. He was ready. Chapter 10: The closure. In the end, the audit was successful. Ethan's plan was ready. He had a plan. He had an NDA. The audit had been completed. Sarah and Julian had no involvement with the company. Ethan was ready. The company's future was safe. The audit was a big risk. Ethan was a man who had a big risk. He had to do a thorough audit. The data was ready. The company was ready. The audit was a new start. It was a big risk for the company. The company was ready. Ethan was ready. The company was ready. The next step was the next step. The company was ready. The company was ready. After a lot of time, Ethan's plan was done. He had done a thorough audit and the company was safe. He had done a thorough audit and the company was safe. Epilogue. Ethan was a man who had a vision. He had a vision of a company that had a risk. He was a man who would do a thorough audit. He was a man who would do a thorough audit. The audit was a big risk. The data was a big risk. The audit was a big risk. The data was a big risk. The audit was a big risk. The audit was a big risk. The audit was a big risk. In the end, Ethan's plan was successful. He had the data. He had a plan. He was ready to protect his company and his own future. The company's future was safe. The company's future was safe. Ethan was ready. He had a plan. He had a data. He had a risk. He was a man who had a risk. He was ready. The end.